The next speaker for the discussion forum is architect Rukshan Widyalankara. Briefing about Chartered Architect Rukshan Widyalankara, he was the past president of Sri Lanka Institute of Architects, and also he was the former president of the Commonwealth Association and has held several key positions in other associations. Chartered Architect Rukshan Widyalankara is the designer of several landmark buildings carried out by his practice at Rukshan Widyalankara Private Limited. He is a distinguished alumni of University of Moratuwa, from where he holds his bachelor's degree in built environment and his master's degree in architecture. Also, architect Rukshan's dedication to work for the common good and willingness to undertake responsibility has equipped him uniquely to the leadership positions that he has held. It is my pleasure to welcome on stage architect Rukshan Widyalankara for your presentation.
I think we have several students. You are students. I can see two over there. Are you all students? Very good. Excellent. So I call these, we were asked to talk about the crisis. The crisis is the buzzword now. And I think today, tomorrow, day after tomorrow, you all have 3 sessions where experts will come and discuss various aspects about the crisis. I thought of taking up maybe few issues about this and how we could approach this. One of the issues is that what is this crisis? Is it something that we never saw? Is it something that came all of a sudden? Or is it something that we should have known? Now, I think those of you attended, those of you who listened to Professor Rohan Samarjeeva the other day, he had a very nice presentation in some graphical manner. He showed the issue where our expenses were more than income in terms of rupees as well as in terms of dollars. I can see some more students are coming. So this was the issue, and so it was obvious that we were heading for this crisis. COVID-19 is something that people always try to put the blame on. Is actually not a wouldn't have been a reason for this, just that it only accelerated it. Had it not been for COVID-19, we would have anyway reached this situation in 2024 or 2025. Let me run through a few other slides. My presentation is quite brief. So you see our issue. On the left, you see the cost per square foot in Sri Lanka, where it is very high compared to some other countries in the region. Now, this is when the dollar was something in the region of 200. Now it is 371. So when it was 200, you can see we are just below Singapore. But whereas Singapore, the GDP is quite high, per capita is something like $25,000, and whereas we are just above maybe 10% of that. Then on the right, you see our taxation systems. So some of the students, I think you will know, we pay direct and indirect taxes on building materials, 107% when it comes to tiles. So there is custom duty, cess, PAL, NBT, VAT. Now the NBT is called by some other name. So it's about 107% or even more. In certain instances, it's much more than that. So our construction cost is also going up as a result of the crisis. Now, how do we set about on this? What do we do now? What we could do is, if we didn't foresee this, what do we do to avoid this happening again? Now, one of the issues we have is although the so-called literacy rate is high, our economic literacy rate is very low. We find it very difficult to read some of the economic indicators and so on. Even when it comes to business, we find it difficult to read the basic financial statements. So that has been an issue in Sri Lanka. So in order for this to not to recur, there are three aspects I just identified, so that I could cover within these 15-20 minutes, that the Sri Lanka or the industry per se should tackle. So one is the data and the statistics. Now that is something that we don't have in Sri Lanka. We have no organization or body that is collecting proper data. I'll show you some of the statistics or some data that some other countries do. There are very important data is captured and which is used for the future. Now we don't have any data to say how much of cement will be required in other maybe 5 years time. So we don't know how much of clinker to import, same with steel billets and so on. So these are the aspects that that are draining our foreign currency. Now the SIDA, for instance, is not doing any, there is what's called the BSR, which was published long time ago. Now I think the BSR is published by the Department of Buildings. Other than the BSR, there is no other document that is published. Now there is a monthly ICTAR bulletin which they publish the price fluctuations. Students should know the price fluctuations are the, when it comes to contracts, the prices are not going to remain the same. Cement is going up, steel is going up, so the contract has to be paid for the additional amount that they would spend. Now for this price fluctuation, they have the indices that they publish every month. So for the construction, when the contractor has to get the money, for that aspect only they do the statistics. Beyond that, there is no statistics that has been published in Sri Lanka. Now in other countries, for instance, these things are captured very well. Globally, there are various companies called HKA, the Curry and Brown, and Hill International, and maybe there are some others also, who do these statistics and data, who present these, and they plan ahead, well ahead, using this data. The second aspect is, we will come back to that, is about the contractual matters. Now we have, just for your information, the SIDA, Construction Industry Development Authority, published contract documents called the standard bidding document. They are called SBD. So there is SBD 1, 2, 3, 4, right, for various projects. And now they have made it mandatory, right? It's mandatory, am I right? SBDs are mandatory. You can't use any other contract document at the moment in Sri Lanka. It's illegal. And if anybody uses that, they say, according to their circular, that you could get, that person could get jailed. It is a criminal offense. It's not a normal civil case. It's a criminal offense. Whether they are not implementing that's a different thing. But if you are using any other document like FIDIC or some other international document like the RIBA, or there are many other documents, you are committing an offense. So with this, now the FIDIC, the CEDA documents only cover certain aspects of the building only. That is mainly on measure and pay, only on measure and pay basis, and also the design and build. So for the measure and pay, they have for projects less than 10 million, major projects and projects over 10 million, up to 100 million and so on. Now there are many other types of contracts that we need. Fixed price contracts, I think some of you will know, in order to partner with the others, partnering types of contracts, cost plus contracts, and to distribute the risk, share the risk. There are different types of contracts and so on. So we need many types of other contracts, but we don't have. It's a very unfortunate situation. And also even CEDA doesn't have the subcontract agreement. So without the subcontract agreement, really you can't do a project. You can't, with the main contractor, do all types of work. You need to have subcontract agreements. So that is another aspect. Then comes the ADR. ADR stands for Alternate Dispute Resolution. So we'll come to that maybe a little later. Now this is actually from HKA. You can see how they have worked out the data for different types of various regions. They have collated. There's so much of construction is going on, and what are the issues they have. So these have been captured. If you go into this HK website, you can see these. Now this is an important table where you see the top causes of claims or disputes. Now this is for globally. The entire world has been captured into one. Now this list, there are different lists for different regions. So maybe in one particular region, the one will be 2 or 2 will be 5 and so on, but other than that, there is not much of a change. So what is number 1 is the changes in scope. So here what I'm trying to say to you is the so-called COVID-19 is well below, it's almost item number 29. So the issues we have now is not really related to COVID-19. It is now there are 3 parties in a contract: consultant, contractor, and the owner, right? All the issues have been created, at least most of them, by these 3 parties, right? So it has nothing to do with the COVID-19. Now the issues, the so-called crisis we say, is the changes in scope, the contract interpretation issues. Now changes in the scope is the scope is changed by the client mainly, and sometimes by the consultants also, and so it goes to a dispute. The contract interpretation issues, okay, that's once again for the consultant. The design information issues, yet again once again issue with the consultants. The design was incorrect. I don't have to tell you what the reason is. Incomplete design. So it will go on and on. You know, if we go further down, you see, except for maybe 1 or 2, everything else could have been managed between these 3 parties. So that is a very important aspect that we don't capture. Now we say everything, the prices are high, not enough work for the contractors. There are 500,000 to 1 million people have gone out now because they don't find work. Certain instances due to the supply chain issues. But the real issue is that if we don't capture these, if we don't attend to these, we will go on facing these issues as we maybe next year, year after, and so on. So this is also once again from the HKA. This is for before construction, during construction, and after construction. So certain issues like the contract interpretation issues comes in before construction. While the construction is going on, there will be certain types of other issues, and after construction, things like the installation failure, operational performance, and so on. So these are the things that have given some weightages into that table. So the table has been compiled basically using these. Okay, I'm not going to take much of your time. So this is basically my last slide. What do we have to do? I mean, taking from that, the collection and analysis of data. I think we should have, the industry should have an organization, a setup where a proper data is collated. Now, this is not going to be easy. It's going to cost, but you know, it's fully worth doing that. Without that, we are basically nowhere. We don't know how much of resources we need, how much sort of staffing we need, and so on and so forth. Then it goes without saying the productivity through things like digitization, the BIM. Then there is a new thing called the digital twin, which is still at the very early stages. It is something similar to Revit, but it is more advanced version of that. The digitization has to happen. It is happening gradually. I think a lot of these companies are working on it now. but it has to, it's nowhere near what the countries in our region have been doing. Then shift in the claims dispute documentation. The document, in a contract, you all know what is important is number one, documentation, number two, documentation, number three, also documentation. If the documentation is not in place, we will have issues in our projects. So the claims for the construction related claims and so on, our documentation should be in place. So it's a long harangue of things that I'm not going to go into into detail. Equitable risk allocation. Now, mostly I have seen particularly in Sri Lanka, the risk of the major part of the risk is put on the contractor. Now in future that's not going to work, because if the risk is shared between the contractor and the client, the projects could work out sort of quite well, easier, and also the cost will be less. Now that's the way in which that you can share risk. There are different types of contractual formats. So once again we go back to our first slide, where the contractual formats will have to be adapted from the international organization. Then the last one is one of the more important ones, which is called the ADR regime. That is, things like arbitration. Now you all know, when there's a dispute in a project, it goes into different stages. It goes into first things like adjudication. Then from there, once that is exhausted, it goes into mediation. Once the mediation is exhausted, then it can go into arbitration. Now the things like adjudication and mediation, although you're supposed to do it, it's not mandatory. You can have adjudication system, you can have things like a mediation, and even after the award is given, the one party can say, no, I'm not interested, I don't want to, I'm not going to go according to that. That's possible. But when it comes to arbitration, it is not so, because there's an arbitration act, and that is mandatory. Now, one of the issues is that I saw the construction industry, the government being the largest developer, has to pay some, I don't know, maybe 200 billion or something like that, something in that region, to the contractors. They have not paid that. There are maybe certain private sector clients also who have to pay sums of money to these various contractors. So they are not paid because they also don't have money. Now what do we do about this? Now that is one of the reasons why this so-called crisis has snowballed into a huge issue now. Unemployment, not enough work. It's a big issue. But there is an easy way out. Now I have, various people have used to contact me. Most of the contractors also, they are clueless as to how to proceed, because our court system is quite tough. There will be long delays in that. Delays in the sense, sometimes it can take sort of years. All the courts are free. The procedure that you have to use is very expensive. The payment to lawyers and the time and so on. So arbitration or the ADR, when it comes to that, it is very easy. It's very easy in the sense it's relatively easy and it's much faster. Now, how to set about that, I think I will just touch upon that also. One of the important thing is this clause of the arbitration clause. Now, arbitration clause is to say that in the contract that in case of a dispute, that you have to go into arbitration. So that clause has to be properly drafted. If you don't have that clause properly drafted, the whole thing falls flat on the ground, because it's not going to work. It has to say there are certain aspects it has to cover, the arbitration clause. Now, most of the time, these clauses like arbitration clause are called the midnight clause. Midnight clause in the sense they don't give any attention to it. Only at the last moment, at the 11th hour, they just put this thing together and then put it and say, okay, this is the arbitration clause. That's not going to help. Now, there are standard formats, but you can adapt the standard format, or you can have something that is uh, tailor-made for your purpose also. So once, say, supposing all that is done properly, then it's a very good system for anyone to go ahead and, if someone is not paying you, if your client is not paying you, it's fairly relatively easier and faster. Now, what are the advantages in this? There is what is called the party autonomy. The party autonomy means, unlike in a court system, you can do it. The parties can decide how it should happen. In what language, whether it is Sinhala or English or Tamil. They can decide where to meet, where will the hearing be, whether they could be represented by lawyers, or it's only the technical people like engineers and so on. So that also they could decide. So basically you are free to do all that. So why I'm saying to you, all this is just to show that it is relatively easy to go into this aspect. Then there is, once a judgment is given, in the court system, if a judgment is given, you can go to higher court and appeal. So you can go on and on doing that. If it's a magistrate court, you can go to the high court to the appeal court, and like that you can go up so many steps, so many stages. But here, once the judgment is given, that's it. You can't appeal. You can appeal only under the very limited circumstances. That's also to the very high court, like the Supreme Court. So once there is no appeal means, once judgment is given, that's it. So if somebody, if in a project that the contractor or the consultant needs to get some payment, it's a very sort of obvious thing, open and shut case, then there's very rare chances that you could give the judgment could be different to that. So once the judgment is given, that party has to pay. There's no way out. Then there are so many other these things like, there's a thing called the New York Convention. I'll just briefly mention to you. Just to give you a comparison, in Sri Lanka, if there's a judgment given to you, it has to be enforced in Sri Lanka. But whereas arbitration is, you can get that thing enforced in any other country. There are 270 odd countries who have signed for the New York Convention. So you can go to any of the New York Convention countries and sue. So those are advantages. I mean, what I'm trying to say is, say some foreign contractor or a company has done some work here, and a Sri Lankan architect goes and sues that guy. Then the judgment is given in your favor, right? But either he has gone back or he has no assets here. Then what do? If it's a court system, court say what can't help. But here now you can go and sue him in China. So something like that. So these, I just wanted to sort of identify these at least 5 elements that the industry, not only our institute, but the industry has to take this up and work that into a coherent system, so that we can, there's some way, some light at the end of the tunnel where this kind of crisis situation will not recur. Now this is not a comprehensive one, these are only certain aspects of it I have identified, which I could cover in a short time. So I hope this will be taken up and by the industry. There is a chamber, there are various government organizations and so on. So if there are any questions, I could try to answer. Thank you.
Yeah, so Architect Rukshan Widyalankara, thank you for that presentation. But I myself have a question about the presentation. I would like to ask about these aspects and elements that you mentioned about looking ahead. I would like to know how and what initial steps and who are actually going to take up the initial steps in this process.
You can see the next president is there, the president after that is going to be here, and so many other people are there. So the other people probably will have to take this up. Is that the question you asked? Yeah. So anyway, this is actually this is not a institute-related thing. It's a industry-related thing. So maybe SIDA or some organization like that has to do it, but I don't think they will ever do this kind of thing. So in other countries, what happens is these taxes. I showed you these taxes. Now they don't just go to the government. These taxes don't just go to the government to fund their expenses. Certain amount is set aside for various organizations, for research work and so on. And to fund this kind of data collection and, all these, probably part of these things that I mentioned. So unless we have a regime of that nature, I don't see this, our Sri Lankan government is getting into any of these things. So it is a sort of a long shot, but anyway, can't help it. We have to we have to achieve this at some point in time. So maybe the institutes like ours can give the do a start, and I think some steps have been already taken, but we need to just work on it in much more in detail. Thank you.